The screen went dark, and the room felt like it had no air. I sat there for a long time, not moving, not breathing properly, just staring at the key. Then I looked at my husband's photograph, and I whispered, "What did you do?" My voice cracked. "What did you leave behind?" My tears fell quietly. I didn't wipe them. I let them fall. Because sometimes your body needs to release something, or it will explode. I picked up the letters again. The bundle. My fingers trembled. I wanted to read them, but suddenly I was afraid. Because what if the letters were full of love, and the locker was full of something else? What if the locker held a truth that would poison everything? I pressed my lips together, and I whispered, "Please don't let this ruin you." I looked around the room. Everything was the same bed, the same lamp, the same chair, but I didn't feel safe anymore. Because secrets change the air. They make even familiar places feel like strangers. That night, I didn't sleep. I tried. I lay down. I closed my eyes. But my mind kept replaying his voice. Even good men carry secrets. I turned on the lamp again. I sat up. And like every night, I looked at his photograph. But this time, I didn't talk softly. This time, I asked. I asked like a woman who deserved answers. I said, "Did you lie to me?" My voice shook. "Did you hide something from me?" The tears came again. Hot. Endless. I whispered, "I gave you everything. My youth. My body. My dreams. My whole life. And I never asked you for anything."
I looked at his photograph, but this time, I didn't talk softly. This time, I asked. I asked like a woman who deserved answers. I said, "Did you lie to me?" My voice shook. "Did you hide something from me?" The tears came again, hot, endless. I whispered, "I gave you everything. My youth, my body, my dreams, my whole life. And I never asked you for anything." My throat tightened. "Why would you keep something from me?" I stared at his face, his calm eyes. And for the first time, that calm didn't comfort me. It frustrated me. Because even in death, he was calm, and I was drowning. I picked up the key. I held it up to the light. It looked ordinary, just metal, but it felt heavy, like it was made of all the things he never said. I whispered, "Tomorrow I will go, and I will find out." Then I paused, and I said something I never thought I would say to him. "If what I find hurts me, I don't know if I can keep talking to you." My voice broke, and I covered my mouth. Because the moment those words left me, I felt guilt crash into me like a wave. How could I say that? How could I threaten the only thing keeping me alive? But it was true. Because if his secret destroyed the love I held on to, then what would I have left? Nothing. Just an empty house and an old woman with no one to speak to. I cried harder then. The kind of crying that makes your shoulders shake. The kind that makes you feel small. I curled forward on the bed and I whispered, "I'm scared. I'm so scared." I stayed like that for a long time. Then finally, I lifted my head and I looked at his photograph.
My throat tightened. Why would you keep something from me?
I opened the door slowly, and there she was, a woman, maybe in her late 40s, early 50s, not young, not old, but her eyes looked tired in a way only life can do. She stood there, holding something wrapped in a small cloth. Her hands were tight around it, like she was afraid she might drop it, or like she was afraid I might take it from her too quickly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy. Then she said quietly, "Are you his wife?" The way she said it, like the word wife had thorns. My throat tightened. "Yes." My voice came out small. She nodded, and I watched her swallow hard, as if she was swallowing years. Then she held the cloth out to me. I think this belongs to you." I didn't move. My eyes stayed on her hands because I recognized the cloth. It was one of his old handkerchiefs. He used to carry it in his pocket, folded neatly. He used to wipe my tears with it when I cried. And suddenly, I felt my knees weaken. I gripped the doorframe. My mouth went dry. "How do you have that?" Her lips trembled. She looked down. Then she said softly, "He gave it to me." Those words hit my chest like a stone. My heart started beating fast. My ears rang, because there was only one way a woman would say that, only one way. I stared at her face. I searched it. I looked for cruelty. I looked for pride. I looked for anything. But she looked like she was drowning, just like me. I whispered, "Who are you?" She opened her mouth, closed it again. Then finally she said, "My name is Margaret." Her accent was different, not like mine, more English, or maybe just different. And then she said the sentence that made my whole body go cold. "I knew him." I swallowed. "Knew him how?" She looked up at me, and her eyes filled with tears. And in that moment, I knew. Before she even said it, I knew. Because a woman does not come to another woman's door with trembling hands unless she is carrying something sharp, something that will cut. Margaret whispered, "I was part of his life." My throat tightened. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I gripped the doorframe harder. My voice came out shaking. "Are you saying—" She nodded quickly. No, please, not like that." She stepped forward slightly. Her voice broke. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to exist in your world." I stared at her. My eyes burned. My hands started shaking. And then, without warning, I started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears spilling down my face because I felt something inside me crack, something I had protected for 20 years, something I had kept sacred. My husband, my love, my marriage, my memories. And now a stranger stood at my door holding his handkerchief, saying she was part of his life. I whispered,
"He never crossed a line." My eyes narrowed. "What?" She nodded quickly. "No. He never betrayed you. He never touched me. He never kissed me. He never." Her voice broke. "He never gave me that." My breath caught. Because I expected her to confess an affair. I expected the worst. But this was something else. Something quieter. Something more confusing. She said, "He only sat with me. He only spoke to me. He only held my hand once. Like a father holds a child." My throat tightened. I didn't know what to feel. Relief, anger, jealousy, gratitude, all of it. Margaret whispered, "He was dying." And that sentence made my whole body go cold. I whispered, "I know." She shook her head. "No, you don't." My eyes filled again. "What do you mean?" Margaret took a shaky breath, and then she said something that made my heart stop. "He knew he was dying, long before you did." I froze. My mouth opened, but no sound came. Margaret's eyes stayed on mine, and she said softly, "He found out 2 years before the hospital. 2 years. 2 years. 2 years." My chest tightened. I felt like the room was spinning. I grabbed the back of the chair to steady myself. No, that's not possible." Margaret nodded slowly. "He didn't tell you. He didn't want to. He said." Her voice cracked. "He said you would stop living." My tears fell harder. I whispered, "So he lied to me." Margaret shook her head quickly. "No, he didn't lie. He just delayed the truth. He wanted your days to stay normal. He wanted you to laugh. He wanted you to believe the future was still wide." My throat tightened. I covered my mouth with my hand. And I cried. I cried because it hurt. I cried because it was love. I cried because it was cruel. Because how could he decide that for me? How could he decide what I could handle? Margaret whispered, "He said you were his whole life. And he cowl. And he couldn't bear to watch you break early." I sobbed. My shoulders shook. I sat down slowly. I couldn't stand anymore. My voice came out through tears. "Then why did he talk to you?" Margaret swallowed. "Because he needed someone to carry something." My eyes snapped up. "Carry what?" Margaret looked at the cloth on the table. Then she said softly, "The truth." I stared at her, my heart pounding, my mouth dry. Margaret continued, He was afraid you would hate him. I whispered. Hate him for what? Margaret's eyes filled again, and she said the sentence that made my stomach drop. For what's in the locker? I froze. The locker. The key. The train station. Everything came back like a wave. I whispered. What is in there? Margaret's lips trembled. She shook her head. I can't tell you. Not like this. Not here. My hands clenched. Then why are you here? Margaret's voice broke. Because I want to go with you. My throat tightened. I stared at her. This woman. A stranger. A woman who knew my husband's secret. A woman who sat with him while he was dying. And now she wanted to stand beside me. As I opened the last door, I whispered, Why would you do that? Margaret looked at me, and her eyes were full of something I didn't expect. Not guilt, not fear, but love. A different kind. She said softly, Because I owe him, and I owe you. My tears fell again. I looked down at the key in my purse. I could feel it like a heartbeat. And suddenly, I realized something. I was not the only woman who loved him. Not romantically, not as a wife, but as a person who was saved by him. And that made me feel proud and furious and broken, all at once. Margaret reached into her bag slowly and pulled out something else. A second key. My eyes widened. What is that? Margaret whispered. He gave me a copy. My breath caught. A copy. So he planned this. He planned it so I wouldn't be alone. My throat tightened. I whispered. He knew. Margaret nodded. Yes. He knew you would need someone when you finally opened it. I stared at her, and for a moment, I didn't see her as an enemy. I saw her as another wounded soul, standing in the shadow of my husband's kindness. I wiped my tears. My voice was quiet. All right. We go together. Margaret's shoulders sagged with relief. But then, she looked at me seriously, and she said, Before we go, there's one more thing you need to know. My heart tightened. What? Margaret swallowed and whispered. He didn't just leave something in that locker. He left someone. I stared at her. My blood turned cold. A person. I whispered. Margaret nodded, and the room felt like it stopped breathing. She said softly, Yes, a person. And they've been waiting for you for 20 years. I didn't speak for a long time, because my mind refused to accept what she said. A person. Waiting for me. For 20 years. My throat tightened so hard it felt like someone was squeezing it. I whispered, That's impossible. Margaret didn't argue. She just looked at me with tired eyes. The kind of eyes that have carried too many secrets for too long. I shook my head slowly. No. No, no, no. My voice cracked. I would know. If there was a person, I would know. Margaret's lips trembled. She whispered, You should have known. That sentence hurt more than anything she had said so far, because it sounded like blame, and I already had enough of that. I wiped my tears with the edge of my sleeve. My hands were cold. My heart was loud. I said, tell me who? Margaret swallowed hard. Then she said, a girl. My stomach dropped. A girl. Not a man. Not a stranger. Not a criminal. A girl. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe properly. My voice came out weak. How old? Margaret looked away. About 23 now. 23. My mind spun. 23 years old. That meant. My fingers curled into fists. That meant she was born around the time my husband was still alive. My throat went dry. I stared at Margaret. My voice came out in a whisper. Is she his? Margaret didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, my whole body understood. I felt like the air left my lungs. I pressed my hand to my chest, and I whispered, no, no, no. I shook my head. My tears came fast, too fast, like my body couldn't hold it. I whispered, no. Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was soft. She's not yours. That was all she said. She didn't have to say more, because that sentence alone cut me open. She's not yours. My whole life. I was the wife. I was the mother. I was the woman who built the home. I was the woman who folded his shirts. I was the woman who held his hand in the hospital. I was the woman who buried him. And now, I was hearing that there was a girl, a child, a piece of him. That didn't come from me. I covered my mouth, and I sobbed. I sobbed like I was 16 again, like I was a girl who just realized love can hurt. I shook my head. This can't be real. Margaret's voice cracked. It's real. I looked at her with anger now. Hot anger. Not quiet. Not polite. I said, then he betrayed me. Margaret flinched. No. I laughed bitterly. How is that not betrayal? Margaret whispered, because she wasn't born from love. Those words made me pause. My crying slowed for a second. My eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Margaret took a deep breath, and then she said something that made my skin go cold. She was born from a mistake. My stomach turned. I stared at her. My voice came out sharp. What kind of mistake? Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. Her face looked pained. And then she whispered, a mistake he spent the rest of his life trying to fix. I sat very still. My heart was pounding. I felt dizzy. I whispered, was it an affair? Margaret shook her head quickly. No, not like that. Then she looked at me and said softly, he never loved anyone the way he loved you. I swallowed. My throat burned. I whispered, then how? Margaret hesitated. Her lips parted. Then she closed them again. And she whispered, it's not my story to tell. That made something snap inside me. I slammed my hand lightly against the table. Then why are you here? My voice shook. If you're going to throw this in my face and then refuse to explain. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She said, Because he made me promise. He made me promise that when you were ready, I would bring you to her. I froze. To her. Margaret nodded. She's not in the locker. My heart dropped. What? Margaret whispered. The locker holds the truth. The truth holds her. I stared at her. My mind couldn't follow. It was too much. Too many layers. Too many doors. Too many secrets. I whispered, "Where is she?" Margaret looked down and said, "She lives in the same city." My blood turned cold. The same city. All these years. She was close. She was breathing the same air, walking the same streets, maybe passing my house without knowing, maybe standing behind me in a shop, maybe hearing my husband's name somewhere, and I never knew. My chest tightened. I whispered, "Does she know?" Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes." My eyes widened. "She knows." Margaret whispered, "She knows who he was. She knows he was married. She knows about you." I felt like someone punched my heart. I whispered, "Then why hasn't she come?" Margaret looked at me with sadness. "Because she's afraid. Afraid of you." That sentence hurt in a different way. Because I suddenly imagined myself as a monster, as a wife with claws, as a woman who would scream. And maybe I would. I didn't know anymore. I whispered, "What does she want?" Margaret swallowed. "She wants nothing. She never asked for money. She never asked for a home. She never asked for your life. She only wanted one thing." My throat tightened. "What?" Margaret's voice broke. She wanted to know why he never came. My eyes filled with tears again. Because I understood that pain. I understood waiting. I understood absence. I understood speaking into silence. I whispered, "He didn't come because he was dying." Margaret shook her head. "He didn't come because he was ashamed." Ashamed. My husband. Ashamed. I didn't know how to hold that. I whispered, "I don't understand." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her voice soft. "He wanted to tell you. So many times. But every time he looked at you, he couldn't do it. Because you looked at him like he was your whole world. And he didn't want to destroy your world." My tears fell again. I covered my face. And I cried. Because love like that is both beautiful and selfish. I whispered through my hands. So he let her suffer instead. Margaret didn't answer. Because she couldn't. Because it was true. I sat there crying. The house was silent. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Then I lowered my hands. And I looked at my husband's photograph. And I whispered, "You were supposed to be honest with me." My voice cracked. "You were supposed to be mine." I stared at his calm eyes. And for the first time, I felt something ugly. Not hate, but betrayal. A small seed of it. And it terrified me. Because my love for him was the one thing I trusted. And now even that felt uncertain. Margaret stood up slowly. She said softly, "We should go." I looked at her. My eyes red. My voice quiet. Go where? Margaret whispered. To the train station. The locker will explain everything. I swallowed hard. I stood up slowly, my knees shaking. I walked to the mirror near the hallway. I looked at my face. Old, wrinkled, eyes swollen from crying. And I thought, how unfair that after 20 years of surviving, I was being forced to start grieving all over again. I picked up my purse. The key was inside. I could feel it, like a heartbeat. Margaret stood near the door. She looked nervous. She said softly, "Are you sure?" I stared at her. My voice came out cold. "No, but I'm going." We stepped outside. The air was colder than I expected. The sky was grey, and I suddenly remembered. My husband used to love grey skies. He used to say, "Grey is honest. Grey doesn't pretend to be happy." I almost laughed. But instead, I cried again, because even the sky was reminding me of him. Margaret walked beside me. We didn't talk much. What could we say? I was walking to meet a truth that could destroy my memories. I was walking toward a stranger who carried my husband's blood. My hands shook inside my coat pockets. My heart pounded with every step. And then, we reached the train station. The same one. The old one. The one we visited once when we were young. The one where he joked about disappearing. The building looked smaller than I remembered. But the feeling was exactly the same. Like time had stopped there. Margaret led the way. We walked inside. The smell hit me first. Metal, dust, old coffee, and something else. Something like goodbye. We reached the lockers. A row of old metal doors. Each one scratched and faded. Margaret looked at me, and she whispered, "This is it." My hands trembled. I pulled the key out of my purse, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I stared at the lock, and suddenly, I felt my husband's presence. Like he was standing behind me. Like he was watching, waiting. I whispered softly, "Please, I'm not ready." Margaret touched my arm gently. "You are." My eyes filled again. I inserted the key. It fit perfectly. I turned it, and the lock clicked. That sound, that tiny click, felt like a gunshot in my heart. I pulled the locker door open, and inside, there was a small bag, a sealed envelope, and a tiny box. My breath caught. Margaret leaned closer, her face pale. I reached for the envelope first. My name was written on it, in his handwriting, and underneath my name were 3 words. 3 words that made my blood freeze, because they were not loving. They were not gentle. They were not romantic. They were the kind of words that change a life. It said, "Forgive me, please." My fingers trembled as I held the envelope. I looked at Margaret. My voice was barely a whisper. "What did he do?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and she said softly, "Open it." My fingers shook so badly I could barely hold the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should, like it was filled with stones, like it was filled with everything he never said. I stared at my name in his handwriting, and underneath, "Forgive me, please." I whispered, "Why would I need to forgive you?" My voice cracked. Margaret didn't answer. She just stood beside me, pale and silent. The train station around us was loud. People walking, suitcases rolling, announcements echoing. But for me, it was quiet, because my whole world had shrunk into that envelope. I slid my finger under the flap. The paper resisted, as if even the envelope didn't want to open. Then it gave way, and I pulled out the letter. It was folded neatly, twice. His habit. He always folded letters like that, even grocery lists. My eyes blurred with tears before I even read a word. I unfolded it slowly, and I began. "My love, if you are reading this, it means you finally found the key. And if you found the key, then it means you were brave enough to open the door I was too afraid to open while I was alive. I am sorry. I am sorry for what I hid. I am sorry for what I delayed. I am sorry for choosing peace over truth. But I did it because I loved you too much. I did it because I knew your heart. I knew that if I told you, you would not only lose me, you would lose yourself. And I could not bear that. You were my home. You were my only real life. Everything good in me was built because of you. But before you were my wife, before we became us, I made a mistake that followed me like a shadow, a mistake that I tried to bury. But shadows don't die, they wait, and one day they stand in front of you. I stopped reading. My throat tightened, my eyes burned, my hands trembled. Margaret whispered, "Keep going." I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the letter apart. I wanted to throw it into the trash like it was poison, but my hands held it tighter, because it was him, his words, his voice, and no matter how much it hurt, I missed him too much to stop. I continued reading. When I was young, I was weak. I was foolish. I was lonely in a way I never told you. Not because you didn't love me, but because I didn't know how to ask for comfort. And in that weakness, I hurt someone. Not with my hands, but with my silence. I hurt someone with my fear. There was a girl, a young woman. She came into my life for a short time, and in that short time, I made a choice that changed everything. She became pregnant, and I panicked. I ran. I told myself I would fix it later. I told myself I would come back when I was stronger. But life moved too fast. And then I met you. And you made me good. You made me honest. You made me the man I always wanted to be. And I thought, maybe if I loved you perfectly, the past would disappear. But it didn't. My vision blurred completely. I couldn't see the words anymore. I pressed the paper against my chest, and I started crying. Not quietly, not politely. I cried like a woman whose whole life was being rewritten. I cried like an old tree cracking in the wind. Margaret stepped closer. She touched my shoulder gently, but I pulled away. I didn't want comfort. I wanted to go back. Back to before the envelope. Back to my bed. Back to my nightly talks. Back to my safe grief. I wiped my tears hard. I forced myself to read again. I never stopped thinking about her. Not because I loved her, but because I knew I had left a child behind. A child who would grow up with questions. A child who would grow up with a hole in her chest. And I knew I was the one who made that hole. I searched for them. I did. But by the time I found out where she went, it was too late. She was gone. And my shame grew. So I kept living. I kept being your husband. I kept being the father of our children. And I tried to be the best man I could. Because I thought, if I became good enough, God would forgive me. And maybe you would never have to know. I swallowed hard. My lips were shaking. I whispered, "You had another child." My voice broke. "You had another child." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. I wanted to hit something. Not her. Not the station. Not the locker. I wanted to hit time. Because time had stolen my chance to ask him. Time had stolen my chance to scream at him while he was alive. Time had stolen my chance to hear his explanation. Now all I had were dead words on paper. I read on. But then I got sick. And I knew. I knew I was going to leave you. And suddenly, my fear changed. Because I realized something. If I died without telling you, then I would be leaving you with a lie. And you deserved better than that. You deserved the truth. Even if it broke you. So I made a plan. Not because I wanted to hide forever, but because I wanted you to find it when you were strong enough. When your grief was softer. When your life was not bleeding every day. I left the key. I left the letters. And I asked Margaret to help you. Because I knew you would not trust anyone easily. And because Margaret, she understands what it is to carry someone's secret. I paused. Margaret. So she wasn't a lover. She was a keeper. A keeper of the truth. A witness. A messenger. My anger toward her softened slightly. Just slightly. But my anger toward him grew. Because he had turned my life into a puzzle. A puzzle I never asked to solve. I continued. My love. The girl is not at fault. She did not ask to be born. She did not ask to be abandoned. And she did not ask to live in the shadow of my shame. If you can find it in your heart, please do not punish her for my weakness. She is your enemy only if you choose to see her that way. But she is not your enemy. She is a lonely child. Even now. And if I could come back for one day, I would do two things. I would hold you. And I would apologize to her. But I cannot. So I am asking you to do what I failed to do. I am asking you to look at her once, just once, and let her see that her father was not completely cruel. Let her see that his life was not completely empty. Let her see that he belonged somewhere, even if it was not with her. My hands were shaking violently now. I lowered the letter. and I stared at the floor. I felt sick. I felt dizzy. I felt like I might collapse. I whispered, "He wants me to meet her." Margaret nodded softly. "Yes." I swallowed. My throat burned. I whispered, "How could he ask that of me?" Margaret's voice broke. "He didn't want to. He just didn't know who else could." I looked at her sharply. "What does she look like?" Margaret hesitated. Then she whispered, "She looks like him." My stomach dropped. I closed my eyes. And suddenly, I imagined it. A girl. With his eyes. His calm. His smile. Walking through the world with his blood. But without his hand. I felt my chest ache. Because that wasn't just betrayal. That was tragedy. A tragedy he created. And now he wanted me to fix it. Me. The wife. The one who was already broken. I lifted the letter again and kept reading. There is a small box inside the locker. Inside it is her address. And something else. Something you deserve to know. The last thing I hid from you. If you read this far, then I am proud of you. Because you are stronger than I ever was. And if you hate me after this, I will accept it. But please, do not stop talking to me. Do not let my mistake take away our love too. Because you are the only love I ever truly knew. Forgive me. Please. Always yours. Him. I couldn't breathe. My whole body shook. The letter slipped slightly in my hands. I grabbed it quickly. Then I looked at the locker again. The small bag. The tiny box. The sealed envelope was open now. But the tiny box remained. I stared at it. My stomach twisted. Margaret whispered, "That's the address." I nodded slowly. My hands reached into the locker, and I picked up the tiny box. It was heavier than I expected. It was a small wooden box. Smooth. Old. Worn. Like it had been held many times. I opened it slowly, and inside, there was a folded paper and a photograph. My breath caught. I picked up the photograph first. My fingers trembled, and when I turned it over, I felt my whole body freeze, because I was looking at him, my husband, standing beside a young woman, and between them, a little girl holding his hand. My throat tightened. I couldn't breathe. The photo shook in my hands. Margaret whispered, "That's her." I stared at the girl. Her hair, her face, her eyes. And then, I saw it. I saw it clearly. Those eyes were his. My tears fell fast. I covered my mouth, and I sobbed. Because she was real. She was not just a secret. She was a person. A child he held. A child he smiled at. A child he looked proud beside. And I had never seen this. Never. Not once. My voice came out broken. He met her. Margaret nodded. He met her, once. Only once. I stared at the photograph, my hands trembling. And suddenly, I felt something I didn't expect. Not hate. Not jealousy. Not anger. I felt pity. For her. For him. For me. For all of us. Because this wasn't a story of romance. This was a story of fear. Fear ruining lives. I wiped my tears. Then I unfolded the paper in the box. It was an address. And beneath it, a name. Her name. I whispered it out loud. And it tasted strange on my tongue. Like a name I should have known. Like a name that belonged in my family, but didn't. I stared at it. Then I looked at Margaret. My voice was small. What now? Margaret swallowed. Now, you decide. I looked down at the address, and I felt my heart pounding, because I knew the next step would change everything. If I went to her, I could lose my marriage even after death. I could lose my love. I could lose my nightly talks. But if I didn't go, then I would be doing exactly what he did, running, hiding, leaving a lonely child behind. I wiped my tears again, and I whispered, I don't know if I can do this. Margaret's eyes filled. She said softly, you don't have to love her. You just have to see her. I held the photograph close to my chest, and I nodded slowly. Then I said quietly, take me to her. Margaret exhaled shakily. Okay. We walked out of the station together. The address in my hand. The photograph in my purse, the letter folded in my pocket, and my heart. My heart felt like it was breaking in a new way, because this time, it wasn't grief. It was betrayal mixed with compassion, and that combination is the most painful thing a heart can hold. We reached Margaret's car. She opened the passenger door for me. I sat down slowly, and as she started the engine, my phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. And when I read it, my hands went cold, because it said, please don't come here. She doesn't know you're coming. I stared at the message. My hands were cold. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Please don't come here. She doesn't know you're coming. I read it again and again, as if the words might change. Margaret glanced at me. What is it? I didn't answer at first, because I couldn't. My mouth was dry. My voice was stuck somewhere deep inside my chest. I held the phone out to her. She read it. Her face went pale. She whispered, "Oh God." I swallowed. Who sent that? Margaret shook her head slowly. I don't know. But the way she said it, I could tell she had a guess. A fear. A memory. Margaret gripped the steering wheel tighter, and I suddenly realized this wasn't just a secret. This was something that had been protected, hidden, guarded, for years. I whispered, "Stop the car." Margaret looked at me. "What?" I said louder, "Stop." She pulled over slowly near a small park. The kind of park where children laugh in the afternoons. But right now it was empty. Grey sky. Cold wind. Dead leaves. Margaret turned off the engine and looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She whispered, "Do you want to go back?" I stared at the address in my hand. the photograph in my purse, the letter in my pocket, and I felt my whole body shaking. I wanted to go back. I wanted to run home. I wanted to sit in my bed and pretend none of this existed. I wanted to go back to talking to him every night. Like love was simple. But I couldn't. Because now I knew. Now I knew there was a girl. A girl who grew up without him. A girl who probably cried herself to sleep like I did. A girl who probably stared at the ceiling and wondered why she wasn't chosen. And suddenly, my anger shifted. Not toward her. Toward him. Toward the world. Toward the cowardice that creates broken children. I whispered, "No. I'm not going back." Margaret's shoulders sagged. She nodded slowly. "Okay." She started the engine again. And we drove. The closer we got, the more my chest tightened. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept wiping my palms on my coat, like I could wipe fear away. Margaret drove quietly. No music. No talking. Just the sound of the road. And then, we turned into a small street. Houses close together. Simple. Not rich. Not poor. Just ordinary. And for some reason, that made my heart ache. Because I realized she didn't grow up in some faraway world. She grew up in a world that could have been mine. Margaret slowed the car. She pointed. "That's the house." I stared. It was small. A little garden out front. A bicycle leaning against the fence. A wind chime hanging by the door. And suddenly, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Because that house looked lived in. It looked warm. It looked like someone had built a life there. And my husband had been part of it. At least once. Margaret parked a little away. Not directly in front. As if she didn't want to announce us. I sat there, frozen. My fingers gripped my purse. Inside it, the photograph. The proof. Margaret whispered, "Do you want me to go with you?" I nodded. "Yes." My voice cracked. "Yes, please." We stepped out of the car. The air was colder here. Or maybe it was just me. We walked slowly toward the house. Each step felt like walking toward a funeral. A different kind of funeral. The funeral of the man I thought I knew. Margaret reached the gate first. She paused. She looked at me. "Are you sure?" I nodded again, even though I wasn't. Margaret opened the gate. It creaked softly. The sound made my stomach twist. We walked up the path. The wind chime moved gently. A soft sound. Like tiny bells. And then we reached the door. Margaret lifted her hand. But I stopped her. I whispered, "Let me." Because this was my husband's secret. And if anyone was going to knock, it should be me. My hand hovered. And then, I knocked. 3 soft knocks. My heart pounded. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps. Slow. Careful. The door opened. And a woman stood there. Older than I expected. Maybe in her 70s. Grey hair. Kind eyes. A grandmother too. She stared at us, confused. Yes. My throat tightened. My voice came out weak. Hello. I'm sorry to bother you. She looked between me and Margaret. Then her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she recognized Margaret. Margaret whispered, "Hello, Mrs. Collins." The old woman's face changed. She stiffened, and she said quietly, "No." That single word. No. It was not a question. It was a warning. My stomach dropped. I whispered, "Please. I just." The old woman's eyes filled with tears instantly, and she whispered, "You should not be here." My throat tightened. "Is she home?" The old woman's lips trembled. She shook her head. "No." Then she looked at me, and her voice became sharp. "You should have come 20 years ago." Those words hit me like a slap. I stepped back slightly. My eyes burned. I didn't know. My voice broke. I didn't know she existed. The old woman stared at me. Then her face softened. Just a little. And she whispered, "I know." She swallowed hard. And she said, "She's at work." My heart pounded. I whispered, Can I wait?" The old woman hesitated. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in." The house smelled like tea, like old books, like warm bread. It was a familiar smell, a safe smell. And yet, I felt like a stranger. We sat in the living room. Margaret sat beside me. The old woman stood in front of us like a guard, her hands clasped tightly. I whispered, "You're her mother?" She nodded. Then she said quietly, "No, I'm her grandmother." My breath caught. Grandmother. So the girl's mother was gone, or absent, or broken. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Where is her mother?" The old woman looked away. Her eyes filled with pain. "She died when the girl was 9. My stomach dropped. 9. A child. A child losing her mother. Then growing up with questions. And no answers. My eyes filled with tears. I whispered, "I'm sorry." The old woman looked at me sharply. Don't say sorry." Her voice shook. "Sorry doesn't raise a child. Sorry doesn't stop the nightmares. Sorry doesn't fill an empty chair at school plays." I flinched. Because she was right. And I deserved it. I swallowed hard. I whispered, "Did he ever help?" The old woman's eyes narrowed. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes." My heart pounded. "He did." She whispered, "He sent money. Quietly. Always. Every month." My throat tightened. Tears filled my eyes again. Because that sounded like him. That sounded like his kind of guilt. His kind of love. The old woman continued. "He came once. Only once. And he stood right there." She pointed to a spot near the window. "He cried. He begged to see her. And I told him." Her voice broke. "I told him he had no right." My chest tightened. I whispered, "You were protecting her." The old woman nodded. Yes. She was already broken. She didn't need a man walking in and out of her life like a ghost. My eyes filled with tears. I whispered, "Does she know?" The old woman's jaw tightened. Yes. She knows her father's name. She knows he was married. She knows there was a wife. My throat tightened. And, does she hate me? The old woman looked at me for a long time. Then she whispered, "She doesn't hate you. She envies you." That sentence crushed me. I covered my mouth. And I started crying. Because envy is not anger. Envy is pain. Envy is a child staring at someone else's life and wondering, why not me? Why not my mother? Why not my home? Why not my love? I sobbed quietly. My shoulders shook. Margaret touched my arm gently. I didn't pull away this time, because I couldn't hold myself up anymore. The old woman's voice softened slightly. She never wanted your husband. She wanted her father. My throat tightened. I whispered through tears, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." The old woman nodded slowly. "I believe you." Then she looked at the clock, and she said softly, "She'll be home soon." My heart started racing. Soon. I wiped my tears quickly. I straightened my coat. I tried to breathe. I tried to look normal. But how do you look normal when you are about to meet the living proof of your husband's secret? Then, I heard the sound of keys, a door unlocking, footsteps, and my whole body froze. The front door opened, and she walked in. She was taller than I imagined. Dark hair tied back, a tired face, a work bag over her shoulder. She looked like a woman who had learned to survive without softness. She stepped into the living room and stopped. Her eyes moved to Margaret first, then to me, and she froze. Her gaze locked onto my face, and I saw it. I saw him. Not in her smile, not in her hair, in her eyes. Those calm eyes. The same calm that once made me feel safe. My breath caught. I whispered, "Oh." The girl, no. The woman, swallowed hard. Her lips trembled. And she whispered, "You're her." My throat tightened. Yes. My voice broke. I'm his wife." She stared at me. Her eyes filled with tears instantly, but she didn't let them fall. She held them back like she had held back her whole life. She whispered, "He's dead, isn't he?" My chest tightened. I nodded slowly. Yes. Her face changed. Something cracked. And she turned her head away quickly, like she refused to cry in front of me. But I saw her shoulders tremble. And suddenly, my heart broke in a new way, because I realized she wasn't meeting me. She was meeting a grave. She was meeting the final proof that he would never come. She whispered, "So that's it." My throat tightened. No, it's not it. I stood up slowly, my knees shaking. I took one step toward her. Then I stopped, because I didn't know if I was allowed. I didn't know if she would hate my touch. I whispered, "I didn't know you existed." Her eyes snapped to mine, and for the first time, her tears fell. She said, "Everyone says that." Her voice broke. "Everyone always says they didn't know. I shook my head. I swear on my life. She stared at me. Her breathing was shaky. Then she whispered, "Did he love you?" That question was not jealousy. It was hunger. A child's hunger. A daughter's hunger. She wasn't asking about romance. She was asking if he was capable of love. If she was unlovable. If she was the problem. My eyes filled again. I nodded. Yes, he loved me. And then I added, crying, "And he should have loved you too." Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth, and she cried. A quiet cry, a broken cry, the kind of cry that has been waiting for years. And something inside me, something hard, melted. Because in that moment, I didn't see a secret. I didn't see betrayal. I saw a lonely child trapped inside an adult body. I reached into my purse, my hands shaking, and I pulled out the photograph. The one from the locker. I held it out to her. She stared at it. Her hands trembled. She took it slowly, and when she saw herself as a little girl, holding his hand, her whole body shook. She whispered, "He came." My throat tightened. Yes. She stared at the photo, and she cried harder. Then she looked at me, and her voice was raw. Why didn't he stay? That question destroyed me, because I didn't know how to answer. Because the truth was ugly. Because the truth was cowardice. Because the truth was shame. Because the truth was, he chose me. And even though I loved him, even though I missed him, even though I talked to him every night, I suddenly felt sick with guilt, as if I had stolen something, even though I didn't. I whispered, crying. He was afraid. He was ashamed. He thought he was protecting everyone. She stared at me. Her eyes filled with anger now. He protected you. He didn't protect me. I nodded slowly, tears falling. You're right. And then, I did something I never expected. I stepped closer, slowly, carefully, and I opened my arms, not forcing, just offering, like you offer a blanket to someone who is cold. She stared at me, her whole body trembling, and for a moment, I thought she would slap me. I thought she would scream, but instead, she stepped forward, and she collapsed into my arms, and she cried, and I cried too. 2 women, strangers, connected by one man's fear, connected by the same loss. I held her like she was my own, not because she was, but because she should have been held, because no one should grow up without being held. She whispered into my shoulder. I waited for him. My throat tightened. I whispered back. So did I. And that was the truth. We stayed like that for a long time, until her crying slowed, until my breathing steadied. Then she pulled back, her face red, her eyes swollen, and she looked at me, and she whispered, "Do you hate me?" That question broke my heart. I shook my head quickly. No, sweetheart. I don't hate you. My voice cracked. I hate that you were left behind. She swallowed. Then she whispered, "Do you still talk to him?" I froze. Because I didn't expect that. I didn't expect her to know about that part. But of course she did. Margaret must have told her. Or maybe she sensed it. I looked down. Then I looked back up. And I whispered, "Yes." Her eyes filled again. And she said something so soft, so heartbreaking. I almost couldn't hear it. She said, "Can I talk to him too?" My breath caught. I covered my mouth. And I cried again. Because that was the most innocent thing anyone had ever asked. Not for money. Not for a place to live. Not for a name. Just a conversation. Just a chance to speak into the air and pretend someone is listening. I nodded slowly. "Yes. Yes, you can." She wiped her tears, and she gave me a small, broken smile. Then she said, "I don't know how." My throat tightened, and I whispered, "I'll teach you." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not healed, not forgiven, not completely, but shifted. Because for 20 years, I thought my nightly talks were my private grief, my private love, my private madness. But now, I realized they could be something else. A bridge between what he destroyed and what we could still save. The old woman, her grandmother, watched us, her eyes wet. She didn't speak, but I saw it. Relief. Not happiness. Just relief. Like a long war was finally ending. Margaret stood quietly near the door, her face pale. She whispered, "Thank you." I didn't answer, because I didn't know if I was thanking her or blaming her. Maybe both. Then the girl, his daughter, looked at me again, and she whispered, "Did he leave anything else?" My stomach tightened. The letters, the tin box, the watch, the ring, the key, everything. I swallowed hard. "Yes," I whispered. "He left letters." Her eyes widened. "Letters?" I nodded. "Yes. For me. And maybe for you too." She swallowed. And then she whispered, "I want to read them." My throat tightened. I nodded slowly. "Okay." Then she looked down, and she said something that made my chest ache. "Can you come back?" My eyes filled. Because that wasn't a demand. That was a child asking not to be abandoned again. I nodded. "Yes, I'll come back." And then, I did something else I never expected. I reached into my pocket, and I pulled out the ring. His ring. The one I found in the drawer. I held it out. Her eyes widened. I whispered, "He wore this." She stared at it. Her hands trembled. She didn't take it. Not yet. She just looked at it. Like it was holy. Like it was cursed. Like it was too heavy. And I realized. This ring had lived on my finger in my heart for 20 years. But it belonged to him. And he belonged to more than just me. I closed my hand around it again. And I whispered, "I'll bring it next time." She nodded, a small nod, and her eyes filled with tears again. Then she whispered, "Thank you." I looked at her, and I smiled through tears, and I said softly, "You don't have to thank me. You should have had this from the beginning." We left the house later. Margaret drove me home. The whole ride was silent. Not awkward, just heavy. When I entered my house, it felt different. The chair was still empty. The cup was still untouched. The walls were still quiet. But something had changed. Because now, I wasn't the only one speaking to him. Now, I wasn't the only one missing him. I walked to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed. The lamp was on. The room was quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in my madness. I looked at his photograph, and I whispered, "You left me something." My voice cracked. Not just pain, not just secrets. You left me, a person. I wiped my tears, and I whispered, "I still don't forgive you." My throat tightened. But I understand you. And that makes me angry, and it makes me sad, and it makes me human. I stared at his calm eyes, and for the first time, I didn't just talk to him. I waited, and in the silence, I imagined his voice. Not loud, not clear, just a feeling, a soft answer, like a breeze, like a memory. And I whispered, "I will go back. I will read the letters, and I will bring her the ring." My eyes filled again. "And when she talks to you, please, please listen." I took a shaky breath, and I spoke one last sentence. A sentence I didn't expect. A sentence that came from somewhere deep. I whispered, "You were mine, and you were hers too." The room stayed quiet, but my heart felt lighter. Not healed, but lighter. Because love, real love, doesn't shrink. It stretches, even when it hurts, even when it breaks, even when it changes shape. That night, for the first time in 20 years, I didn't talk to him alone. I called her, and when she answered, I heard her whisper into the phone, "Hello, Dad," and my whole body shook, because I realized this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something new, something painful, something beautiful, something we never asked for, but somehow still needed.